Claim 4. America is a structurally racist country. One can be forgiven to be confused by this claim, as its advocates rarely define their terms or differentiate between individual racism and structural racism. This claim is also sometimes known as systemic racism or foundational racism, and is often backed up with arguments of implicit or unconscious bias. The first way to challenge this argument is to ask its proponents to define their terms in specifics. Which specific system, law, policy, official practice, or guideline is unequivocally discriminatory against a race? To their enormous credit, the makers of the viral video Systemic Racism Explained do actually try to provide two specific examples for this argument. 1. Mortgage practices claiming banks don't lend money to black people. 2. Bad schools in bad neighborhoods. Let's dissect each individually to see if there are any facts backing these up. Number 1. Discriminatory mortgage practices. One problem with this, which the makers of the video must have been aware of, unless they did absolutely no research, is that this practice was made illegal in 1968 with the introduction of the Fair Housing Act. And if any bank was shown to break this law, they would be liable to multi-million-dollar lawsuits. For 52 years, there has been a law in place that specifically make illegal such practices. The exact opposite of systemic, in other words. Problem number 2 is that promiscuous lending practices was precisely what caused the 2008 financial crash. Banks approving mortgages to anyone, even illegal immigrants, regardless of whether they could afford it or not. Subprime loans such as Ninja or No Income, No Jobs were widely practiced, and anyone applying for a home mortgage would be approved. How is this relevant? Because recessions tend to hurt black and minority communities far worse than they do white or affluent communities. So, if the makers of the video wish to propose implementing conditions which will replicate the 2008 housing crash, then they'll have to explain why the inevitable recession will not be seen as racist. Banks are only interested in money, whether it comes from blacks or whites. It would be completely illogical for them to discriminate against qualified customers because of their race. So, until and unless the advocates of this claim are able to present evidence that qualified black citizens are being rejected loans for some strange reason, or wish to argue that banks should loosen their lending practices and offer loans to unqualified individuals simply because they are black, there is no reason to take this claim seriously. Argument number 2. Bad schools in bad neighborhoods. Certainly most unwillingly, the makers of this video have made a textbook argument for conservative policies of charter schools and school choice, the only proven remedies for black students in poor schools. This policy is directly opposed by the NAACP and the Democratic Party, despite overwhelming evidence of its efficiency, because, as Jason L. Riley points out, these people are more focused on job retention for teachers than the success of students. Add to this an enormously powerful teachers union who have made the cost for schools to fire bad teachers to over $350,000, resulting in even pedophile teachers not being fireable, then it is quite clear that the problem lies with the left-leaning blocs and not the pro-market parties. School choice and charter schools are the best possible solution for black students. But if the NAACP themselves are opposing it, then the school situation in America can hardly be accused of racism. The video talks about how schools in poorer, crime-ridden neighborhoods are bad for students, but it never mentions a word about why these neighborhoods are poor, or more importantly, who is committing the crimes. Hint, it's not the racists. But there is also another major problem with education within the black community: acting white. I got there and immediately found out that I could read better than anyone in the school. My father's example and mother's training had made that come easy. I could pick up a book, read it out loud, pronounce the words with proper inflection, and actually know what they meant. When the nuns found this out, they paid me a lot of attention. One even asking me, a 4th grader, to read for the kids in the 7th grade. When the kids found this out, I became a target. It was my first time away from home, my first time in an all-black situation, and I found myself punished for doing everything I was taught was right. I got all A's and was hated for it. I spoke correctly and was called a punk. I had to learn a new language simply to be able to deal with the new threats. I had good manners and was a good little boy and paid for it with my hide. Kareem Abdul-Jabbar becoming Kareem. Barack Obama, Michelle Obama, Jay-Z and Oprah Winfrey are just some of the successful black individuals who have talked about the phenomenon of acting white. This is not just an anecdotal claim. It is not, as professional race pimp Michael Eric Dyson claims in his book Is Bill Cosby Right?, an urban legend. It is a fact that has been established in over a dozen scholarly ethnographic studies. Mention it to a group of black youths and they will immediately be able to explain it. Being good in school, talking standard English, hanging around the white kids, doing homework, and striving to do well academically, not wearing low-hanging trousers or oversized t-shirts. Perhaps the most conclusive evidence for this phenomenon is chronicled in the research of John Ogbu, professor of anthropology from University of California, Berkeley, in his groundbreaking book Black American Students in an Affluent Suburb. Ogbu and his team of researchers were invited by the black residents of Shaker Heights, Ohio, an affluent Cleveland suburb, to examine the black and white achievement gaps in their community. Roughly a third of the town's residents were black, and their school district was divided equally along racial lines. Yet the black kids trailed behind their white counterparts in every measure: test scores, grade point averages, placement in high-level classes, and college attendance. Black students were receiving 80% of the D's and F's. Nationwide, black scores on the SATs and other standardized tests are far lower on average than those of whites. By the end of high school, the average black student is several years behind white kids in reading and maths. The usual explanation of this is class and inequality. Blacks don't perform as well as whites because they come from a lower socioeconomic background and their schools have fewer resources, goes the argument. What Ogbu found is that this problem transcends class and persists even among the children of affluent black professionals. None of the versions of the class and inequality argument can explain why black students of similar social class and backgrounds residing in the same neighborhoods and attending the same school don't do as well as white students, wrote Agbo. Even when adjusting for socioeconomic backgrounds, one still sees that black students at every class level perform less well in school than their white counterparts. Agbo and his team of researchers were given access to parents, teachers, principals, administrators, and students in the Shaker Heights School District, which was one of the country's best, and he concluded that black culture, more than anything else, explained the academic achievement gap. The black kids readily admitted that they didn't work as hard as whites, took easier classes, watched more TV, and read fewer books. A kind of norm of minimum effort appeared to exist among black students, wrote Agbo. The students themselves recognized this and used to explain both their academic behaviors and their low academic achievement performances. Due to peer pressure, some black students didn't work as hard as they should and could. Among their black friends, it was not cool to be successful, or to work hard, or to show you're smart. One female student said that some black students believed it was cute to be dumb. Asked why, she said it was because they couldn't do well and they didn't want anyone else to do well. Agbo found that black high school students avoided certain attitudes, standard English, and some behaviors because they considered them white. They feared that adopting white ways would be detrimental to their collective racial identity and solidarity. Unfortunately, some of the attitudes labeled white and avoided by the students were those that enhanced school success, enrolling in honors and advanced placement classes, striving for high grades, talking properly, hanging around too many white students, and participating in extracurricular activities that were populated by whites. What amazed me was that these kids who come from homes of doctors and lawyers are not thinking like their parents. They don't know how their parents made it. They are looking at rappers in ghettos as their role models. They are looking at entertainers. Their parents work 2 jobs, 3 jobs to give their children everything, but they are not guiding them, Agbo told the New York Times in 2002. Another critical area the video gets completely wrong is the claim that as affluent areas and poor areas invest significantly different sums through property tax into the school systems, it leads to an enormous discrepancy between schools in such neighborhoods. This claim dodges a plethora of policies implemented by states and federal government, such as Title I, created in 1965, or George W. Bush's No Child Left Behind initiative, to combat such discrepancies along with a multitude of other federal and state programs. These missions accomplished precisely what was intended, helping equalize the funding of poor and affluent districts, according to Andy Smarik in his book The Urban School System of the Future, Applying the Principles and Lessons of Chartering. As of 2004-2005 school year, America's highest poverty district had per student revenues virtually equivalent to the nation's lowest poverty districts, Smarik continues. In conclusion, the viral video Systemic Racism Explained is misleading and inaccurate in the arguments that the makers put forward. One, discriminatory lending practices are illegal and have been since 1968, making it the exact opposite of systemic. And two, the school districts in poor neighborhoods are not less funded than those in affluent neighborhoods. So, if neither argument holds water, what does explain the current disparity between whites and blacks? Can we talk about culture? One does not feel at ease when dubbing a destructive culture black, as it suggests racialist inferiority. But there's not a single person who wouldn't know what is referred to when topics such as gangster rap, snitches get stitches, gang violence, acting white, bitches and hoes, glorification of drugs, particularly cannabis, and drug dealing, and dedication to antisocial behaviors are brought up. The battle rap scene, for example, is exclusively built on who can brag about having most guns, who can most cleverly describe murdering his opponent, who has most credit in the street, who has spent most time in prison, who has dealt most drugs, who has stabbed most people, who has slept with most girls, and so on. White battle rappers are often ridiculed for being studious, coming from two-parent households, not having the black experience, not being street, and never having served time. The audience, also predominantly black, cheer vociferously as each bar trumps the next in how to best stab, beat up, or murder one's opponent. Gangster rap, a multi-billion-dollar industry, plays on the same themes. For sure, artists like Jay-Z and Lil Wayne have an enormous white following. But the difference between white fans and black fans is that white kids nod along to the music, whereas black kids see their lyrics as a blueprint for life. Rappers with a background in drug dealing are dime a dozen. The Notorious B.I.G., Tupac, Jay-Z, and 50 Cent are just some of the few names having talked about their past endeavors as pushers, earning street cred for their histories. This may seem trivial to many viewers, but a 2008 Pew poll showed that 71% of blacks agreed that rap has a bad influence on society. When someone like Michael Eric Dyson praises rap and calls its opponents racists, he's in fact in the minority view in the black communities. Any culture that not only endorses but positively encourages drug dealing, thug life, gang violence, antisocial behaviors, and reaffirms victimhood mentality, racial separationism, and the philosophy of society being structured against the progression of a people based on their race, despite its artists being the perfect evidence of the opposite, will produce disciples who believe it to be true. Rappers have at their best been a beacon of light, shining on the injustices in society and their own communities. Tupac's Dear Mama, maybe the greatest rap song of all time, is a heartfelt tribute and celebration of a single mother, herself once a crack fiend, raising 2 children on welfare while his coward father was missing. The theme is ever present in hip-hop. From greats like the aforementioned Jay-Z to Jules Santana, the pain of missing fathers is one rappers know their black audiences will relate to. Sociologists, anthropologists, psychologists, and criminologists concur. The absence of a father figure is one of the most detrimental threats to a child's future well-being. From psychological challenges to rates of school dropouts, poverty, criminality, teenage pregnancy, drug abuse, absent fatherhood is far more decisive than any policies enacted by public officials. Anthropologist Margaret Mead said, "The ultimate test of any culture is whether it can successfully socialize men to willingly nurture their children." This is an uncomfortable truth because it places the responsibility on blacks rather than blame on whites, and is for this very reason rejected by race hustlers who profiteer on promoting racist conspiracy theories. More on this in part 4. Don Lemon, the very progressive host of CNN Tonight, had an uncharacteristic moment of honesty when, in 2013, he agreed with former Fox News personality Bill O'Reilly about absent fathers, and even said O'Reilly didn't go far enough in his criticism. Lemon proceeded to offer 5 things black people should adhere to succeed in society.
The reason there is so much violence and chaos in the black precincts is the disintegration of the African American family.
He's got a point. In fact, he's got more than a point. Bill?
Raised without much structure, young black men often reject education and gravitate towards the street culture, drugs, hustling, gangs. Nobody forces them to do that. Again, it is a personal decision.
He is right about that too. But in my estimation, he doesn't go far enough. Because black people, if you really want to fix the problem, here's just 5 things that you should think about doing. Here's number 5. And if this doesn't apply to you, if you're not doing this, then it doesn't apply to you. I'm not talking about you. Here's number 5. Pull up your pants. Some people, a lot of them black, gave me flack for saying that recently on the Wendy Williams show.
If you're sagging, it means, I think it's your self-esteem is sagging and who you are as a person. It's sagging. Young people need to be taught respect, and there are rules.
Sagging pants, whether it's Justin Bieber or no-name Derek around the way, walking around with your ass and your underwear showing is not okay. In fact, it comes from prison when they take away belts from the prisoner so that they can't make a weapon. And then it evolved into which role a prisoner would have during male-on-male prison sex. The one with the really low pants is a submissive one. You get my point? Number 4 now is the N-word.
For our generation, what we did was we took the word and we took the power out of that word.
We took this word and we made it into poetry.
I understand poetic license, but consider this. I hosted a special on the N-word, suggesting that black people stop using it, and that entertainers stop deluding yourselves or themselves and others that you're somehow taking the word back. By promoting the use of that word when it's not germane to the conversation, have you ever considered that you may just be perpetuating the stereotype the master intended, acting like a nigger? A lot of African Americans took offense to that too, and I wondered if I gave the right advice. I really did. But confirmation came the very next day on my way home when I exited the subway on 125th Street in Harlem. This little kid in a school uniform, no older than 7 years old, he was crying his eyes out as he walked down the sidewalk with his mother. I'm going to be honest here. She turned to him and she said, "I'm sick of you. You act like an old-ass man. Stop all that crying, nigger." Is that taking the word back? Think about that. Now, number 3, respect where you live. Start small by not dropping trash, littering in your own communities. I've lived in several predominantly white neighborhoods in my life. I rarely, if ever, witness people littering. I live in Harlem now. It's an historically black neighborhood. Every single day I see adults and children dropping their trash on the ground when a garbage can is just feet away. Just being honest here. Number 2, finish school. You want to break the cycle of poverty? Stop telling kids are acting white because they go to school or they speak proper English. A high school dropout makes on average $19,000 a year. A high school graduate makes $28,000 a year. A college graduate makes $51,000 a year. Over the course of a career, a college grad will make nearly $1 million more than a high school graduate. That's a lot of money. And number one, and probably the most important, just because you can have a baby, it doesn't mean you should, especially without planning for one or getting married first. More than 72% of children in the African American community are born out of wedlock. That means absent fathers. And the studies show that lack of a male role model is an express train right to prison. And the cycle continues. So please, black folks, as I said, if this doesn't apply to you, I'm not talking to you. Pay attention to and think about what has been presented in recent history as acceptable behavior. Pay close attention to the hip-hop and rap culture that many of you embrace, a culture that glorifies everything I just mentioned, thug and reprehensible behavior, a culture that is making a lot of people rich, just not you, and it's not going to.
If even black ultra-progressives are willing to discuss culture, then why is it verboten and even racist for non-blacks to do so? Can we have an honest conversation about culture?